Okay, we're going to continue today. We're moving on to chapter 3, basically. Before we get started with chapter 3, a couple things before I forget. I told you about your practicum requirements. You need to get those in. Exam 1 is moving to February 8th. It was on the 6th, so moving to the 8th because we're a day behind already. So what we'll do is make sure I'll have you prepared for all that stuff. Okay? Question?
Yeah, does that cover just what we covered in lecture, or is that the entire book?
Just what we cover in it'll be all the chapters we cover, but everything that I cover is in the book too. That makes sense? I'm not pulling anything out on the test that would be surprises. It's stuff we pretty much talk about every day.
But do we need to go through the book too?
I would read through it just to refresh yourself. You got to. So that was just a reminder of that. The spiritual development part for this morning is I'm starting with this. Who is this person here? Bill Gates. He's in front of you. If you have any type of computer with Microsoft on it, whether it be Word or a PC with Microsoft on it, this is the guy you should think. He's one of the world's richest men, right? How much is he worth, you think? Billions, right? Billions, okay. My next question, what about him? Okay, I'll put prices down there, but what about, how much is he worth? Now, the reason I ask that is because we often put a price on what people can do for us, and that's what Bill Gates has done. He's done something for us. What can he do for us? A lot, right? Emotionally, psychologically, this kid can do a lot for us if we take time to do it. And that's the reason I bring that up. So, going on down to our Bible selection from 3:16. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. You guys all know that. It's all Sunday school stuff, right? So God thought so much, we were worthy so much that he loved us so much he died for us. Okay? He gave us the opportunity to have a relationship with him because of that. So those relationships with him, that relationship with him must be spread through relationships with others. And that's how God has focused us, especially as Christians, is to have relationships with each other. And that's how we know God lives in our lives. So, should we treat him differently than Bill Gates? What if Bill Gates comes in the room and sits down? I'm probably going to pass out and say, dude, what are you doing? Right? I would treat him differently because it's a different situation. But if Bill Gates and this young man came in the room at the same time, I shouldn't treat them any differently. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So that's my spiritual development thoughts for this morning. Any prayer requests? Anybody want to pray for us? I'm going to get one of you to pray sometime. Don't look away. You know you look away. I'll look away since I'm about to pray. All right, I'll pray for us. You guys are just not Christians. Jesus, thank you so much for this day. I know it's cold and snowy, and thank you for allowing us to get here in class this morning. Help us this morning. See value and worth in everyone. Not what they can offer to us, but what we can offer to them. I pray that we reach out to the people around us that need you as their Savior. And Father, I pray that you just help us give you glory in everything that we do. And we pray. Amen. Okay. Good morning. Langford. What are you missing? Oh, you're missing your liability insurance and the meeting. So you have the meeting next week.
I just got my
Okay, well then we'll fill in that. So you're good. So the next week's are the meetings. So you can choose one of those days. I want to go back and revisit before I forget. Chapter 2, a little bit of universal design. This. Did you give one to Cassie too? Mm-hmm. You're welcome. This talks a little more about universal design and how we can meet the needs of students using that principle. Do you guys remember what universal design that I described it as?
I think there's like kind of two things. One was like building, like we had the elevators making it possible for everyone to access the building.
Absolutely.
But also in learning like different methods of teaching and testing and stuff.
You're on the right track, yeah. So putting those two things together, you said that it's designed for a few people, but everybody benefits from it. So that's, to me, universal design. So that's good. That's very good. See, look, you've been paying attention. So I'll let you read through those things for universal design. I just want you to have a little more information about it. Basically, how you're going to make it equitable for everybody in your classroom. If you have students in your class with disability, how you're going to make that a level playing field for everyone. If you flip it over to the other side, it talks about the continuum of services. It has a triangle that's upside down. And if you look at the top, it basically says in the classroom all the time, all the way down to the very bottom tip is they are not in the classroom all the time. Does that make sense? We kind of talked about that and how services in least restricted environment play into special education. Basically, in special education, the goal is to have them in class all the time. And what's the term we use for that, even though it's not the law? You want them in class all the time? Inclusion, mainstreaming, right? So what's the law? Look at you, yeah, least restrictive environment. There you go. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the classroom all the time. It could be a self-contained classroom. It all depends on what the least restrictive environment is, okay? So I want you guys to have that too. It's just another example of me killing a tree. And you're supposed to be paperless. Now that's not requirement. So it's just something about holding paper, don't you think?
Yes.
All right. Okay, let's move into chapter 3 now, and this is culture and special education. And it's interesting that we talk about culture and special education together because, by the way, culture is a big push, diversity is a big push in education, and there's a lot of objectives you have to fulfill in Kansas Department of Education, objectives and so on. We do the same thing here. We reinforce it with this class with culture and education. So why is culture and special education a big deal? Anyone?
We're a very diverse country with lots of different cultures.
Very diverse country, that's good. What else? These are you want Cassie changing this. Why is culture and special education a big deal? I'm using my wait time. It's hard to think in the morning. It's snowing. At least you're in here, it's warm. We're fuzzy and warm in here this morning. Do we stereotype people? You're a liar if you say you don't stereotype people, because you do, right? If you see a Asian person in a school, what's the first thing you think of? Smart, right? Why? That's it. Not because they are, it's because they're forced to be at times by their parents, right? So, how's that playing in special education then? Let's say you get an Asian kid from Taiwan that has a learning disability. And then not a good reader, not a good test taker, not a good writer. And their brother or sister is excelling and they're not. Think about the culture problem there. What does the parent then say about that kid? They're lazy, they're good for nothing, why can't you be like your brother or sister? All these different things, and they can't understand the reason of having a learning disability, right? Okay, granted, you've heard of ADHD and all those things. We'll talk about this later on. There's a difference between a kid needing a good butt whooping and actually having a disability, okay? So we have to kind of keep that in mind. If a kid truly has a disability, there's nothing you can do about it. Punishment or anything, they have a disability, okay? But there are some kids that just need to be punished, right? We know that. I know my own kids are the same, okay? So within special education, it's very important that we look at culture in special education. So Asian is an extreme issue there, right? So what's another one? Let's say a white family with a kid in special education. Let's say they live in Blue Valley. That's a culture in itself, isn't it? They go to the new Blue Valley Southwest High School, which is like Johnson County Community College South. Have you guys been out there? You got to go sometime. It's huge. Humongous. I'm always getting sidetracked. You walk in the gymnasium and the lights automatically come on. It's just beautiful. And when you leave, about 5 minutes later, the lights shut off, if there's nobody in there. I don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, okay. If you go to that culture, a family that has a kid with ADHD, yeah, they realize he has a disability. We need to get him services, and he needs accommodations on the ACT and SAT. Why would that be a problem? Well, it's not a problem, but why would they want that?
Because they want him to succeed.
They want him to succeed, they want him to have scholarships, and they want him to be best in his class, right? So there are different ideas with cultural special education, right? So that's one thing we're going to talk about with this chapter here, okay? On this sheet here, you got a few questions. Now, I'm not going to ask you where your great-grandparents came from, great, whatever. But let's look down at number 4. Number 4. You should know who taught you your value system, but number 4. Are your values more important than somebody else's values? And as a teacher, you bring those to the classroom, don't you? Right? So if you have a Muslim man and woman come into your classroom with their child, their values are going to be a little bit different from you as an American, right? Well, maybe they're from Saudi Arabia. They come to over to the United States, they're working, they come to your classroom, their kid has a disability, you're sitting there talking to them. Females, you may have a problem talking to the dad. Why is that?
Your culture, it's suitable for men to be.
Absolutely. He may not talk to you, may not respect you, may not want to do that. Guys, you probably won't have a problem at all, right? But if guys, you're talking to the mom, you're going to have a problem. Because you're not supposed to talk to the female, right? So you have to kind of keep in mind what is their culture, what needs to take place in that situation. And then is your value system being open and free and honest different or better than their value system? And I can't say no, we can't say that's true. However, I can say that it's not a right value system of treating women like property. I understand that. But we have to keep in mind, if you're going to sit in a classroom with kids with special needs or with a family, you've got to take in the culture into consideration. When you lived at home, there's some things you think about. Was education pressed, or did you just say do your best? Were you supposed to get A's and B's, or could you get C's and D's? I could get C's and D's. My mom said, just do your best. If you graduate, that's good, right? Well, it's not good, actually, for me, because I just didn't try hard enough. And then it showed when I came to college. It was horrible. I had a 1.6 GPA my freshman year. It was beautiful. You have to really try to get that GPA, by the way. You have to really try. And it takes you a long time to recover from that GPA. Anyway, how many of you were pushed? You must get A's and B's. If you get less than that, you're going to be grounded. You can't. How many of you were pushed like that?
It wasn't random, but
Did they yell at you?
it was expected.
Oh, okay.
I think he did it as consequences, but.
Yeah. Some of you had self-imposed push to be successful because you have, extracurricular activities, music, you have band, you have athletics, you have to be in, you have to keep a certain GPA up and so on, right? So, were you ever looked down upon because of your gender? All right, guys we'll talk about the second. Girls, have you ever had anybody look at you as a female and say, you're not as smart as a guy, or not as good as a guy? And just recently, you have? Give me an example.
Well, it was mainly when I was working in the cafeteria. I know that some of them were joking around.
Yeah.
But most of the guys that I worked with were like, "Oh, you're the girl. You should be doing this." I'm like, "No, you don't understand." Like,
my son says to my wife the other day, "Woman, make me a sandwich." That was so awesome. I laughed really hard about that. So, then she proceeded to punch him in the nose. But females oftentimes, they can't do things as good as males. They're not as strong as males, and they're smarter than males. Think about that. You guys agree with that? Absolutely. Well, yeah. When you get married, you'll realize you will always be wrong. You're always not as smart. Women control the world. I'm telling you right now, women control the world. However you think, yes or no, there's only one. I'm not going to go there. But women control the world. They can tell men to do whatever they want, and they'll do it. Anyway, that's culture. Okay. Man, have you ever been looked at because you're a jock or you're a tall guy or, yeah, I don't do this. Or you're a guy and they want you to be the tough man. You know, all these different things. Culture plays a role in that, you know, and how we see our identities. And it's even more prevalent in special education. Think about a kid with Down syndrome that is not manly in culture. Or think of a typically developing kid that is not manly. What do people do? They say things about them, they talk about them, which is terrible. Why can't we just get along? That's my Rodney King quote. Right. Anyway. Have anybody ever told you you're not going to make it in college or in something, or let me tell you, you can't do it, you're stupid. You'd be surprised how many people have heard from a counselor or a teacher in high school or whatever, in elementary school, oh, you're just not good enough to do that. Anybody ever told you you're not good enough to do something? Like softball or something like that? It's because you're so good at it. Well, typically, you know, most people, if they have a good self-esteem and self-efficacy, they feel good about themselves and they overcome that, and just all the more they want to do better, right? So, how has culture impacted your view on education? You probably haven't even thought about culture and education other than looking at these classes and so on. How do we view culture in special education now that we know that the majority of people in special education are what race? African American. Or the majority of the people in special education are minority and low socioeconomic status. And there's a correlation, some of those things correlate because, you know, if you have a family that the mom and dad work 2 or 3 jobs and the kids are at home a lot by themselves, the families are not reading to their kids, and then that plays a role in the development of the reading skills and math skills and all these different things of kids when the kids are at home by themselves and they don't get all this additional work, right? So that's part of it too. It's just because they're poor, they automatically have a gene saying they're in special education. No, that's not the case. There was a report that came out, I can't remember the year, so you can Google it. It's called The 8-Hour Retarded Child. They were saying that this kid, they were following this kid, that he would go to school, be labeled as mentally retarded. He was an African American, by the way. Be labeled as mentally retarded at school. When he left school to go home, he was just like everybody else. Playing basketball, watching TV, hanging out with his friends, everything. They thought, okay, for 8 hours a day, he's labeled this, but when he goes home, he's not labeled that. Right? So they're trying to get away from that push, and that is because the African Americans, minorities in general, are over-identified in special education just because of some of the things we talked about, right? Because they come to school hungry, they're not wanting to learn. And they fall behind their classmates and all these different things, okay? You guys ever went to school hungry? No, I'm talking about seriously hungry. Didn't eat all weekend, and you may have skipped breakfast. Even this morning you may have skipped breakfast. Can you imagine a little kid, let's say in 4th, 5th grade, even in high school, you know how high schoolers are. They go to school and they haven't eaten probably for a day or two. Can you imagine them wanting to learn? And why would they want to learn if they're hungry, right? So, and that's some signs we have to look at as teachers, especially in special education, right? It's just compounded with special education. Down on Focus 1, it says Civil Rights Movement desegregation resulted in high numbers of students from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds being increasingly tracked into programs for students with mental retardation. Why? I just talked about that. Because the idea that they are behind their peers at times because of a number of different factors, they are then labeled as having mental retardation. Now, and I just wanted to highlight that right up above it. It says issues and trends and multiculturalism and special ed, cultural sensitivity, celebration of diversity, giving up bad habits, yours, mine, ours, collaboration, cultural reciprocity, stereotyping, and myths. These things all play a role in education, and we'll talk about a few of those things, all right? So giving up bad habits would be saying they're not good enough or they can't do something. Just because somebody has autism doesn't mean they can't learn how to read, write, or do math, right? Yours, mine, and ours. Just because you are a general education teacher and you have special ed kids in your classroom, you can't always defer to the special ed teacher. It's your job to teach them too. So they're your kids, right? Collaboration, that's when, we'll talk about that next chapter. When you and the special ed teacher, physical therapist, you mesh together and you become one team to help meet the needs of that child. And then let's talk about cultural reciprocity, okay? On page 68 of your book, it has information about cultural reciprocity. There are some assumptions in special education. And see if this rings true to you as you think about special education. Disability is a physical phenomenon. What does that mean? Disability is a physical phenomenon. Disability is a physical, not normal, right? So think about that. We think phenomenon is something that's not normal. And we have to go back to the idea of the normalization principle. We can't put that focused in that. So just because somebody has a physical disability, they're not normal. They're in a wheelchair. They can't walk. They use a cane. They're blind. They're hearing impaired. All these different things. Those are just assumptions that we make, okay? The next one, disability is an individual phenomenon. So that only one person is dealing with that for some reason or another, okay? Disability is a chronic illness. That means they have this illness all the time, but eventually it might go away, okay? Disability requires remediation or fixing. There we go to the idea of normalization principle. Are we supposed to fix those kids that have special needs? No. That's not our job. Our job is to deal with their needs, help them learn the curriculum at that time. And that's basically what special education is. Giving them access to that curriculum, okay? Disability is a group phenomenon. It only occurs in their family. Have you ever seen a family that has multiple disability kids? Like they have 4 kids and they all have the same disability, like genetics. What's your first thought? Oh, I got one kid born with a disability. And thought, well, we'll have another kid and see what happens. And they have the same disability. Would you think that they would stop having kids? You would think. But then we're making this assumption that just because they have 2 kids that they don't want any more kids, and whatever the case. Personally, I would stop. But I can't put myself in their mind, right? Personally, I would stop. For example, Alex that pushes the mail cart, he has a brother that has autism also. I think it's a little less severe than Alex's, but that's showing there's a genetic trait there somehow, right? But it's not always genetic for autism either, by the way. So, and then disability is time-limited phenomenon, meaning it can go away over time. If you have a disability, it will stay a disability unless you can do something drastic. If you learn disability, you always have a learning disability. You have autism, mental retardation, you always have them. But if I have a disability with glasses, I can't see far off. I seriously cannot see very far off at all. So I put these glasses on and it fixes it, right? So my disability is somewhat fixed. Okay? If you can get a hearing implant for your ears if you're deaf or hard of hearing, then that sometimes can fix that. Okay? So cultural reciprocity is some things that we make assumptions about. You bring these assumptions into your classroom now. You have a classroom full of 30 kids, you have 8 Hispanic, you have 4 African American, you have 2 white, and the rest are Polynesian. Who knows, right? What then do you bring in that classroom? Your own biases, right? You guys ever make fun of another culture? Come on, you know you have. We all have done it. And why do we do those certain things? It's because it's different. Say it again.
So do you.
Yeah, because absolutely. That's the number one cause right there. Americans are stupid. I just want to tell everyone that. But I'm an American, so I'm stupid. We make fun of different cultures. We just do that out of because we're scared of them or we're uneducated about them or whatever the case, right? But you bring those biases into your classroom. So if you have a kid that's Muslim and wearing a No, a girl is Muslim and wearing a burqa. Is that what you call those things? Do you have any assumptions about her when you see her? She walks in your classroom the very first time. What stereotypes are you going to make of her, right? As opposed to just looking her in the face and being nice about it. But we're human. We're going to make stereotypes about it, okay? So cultural reciprocity means that taking those stereotypes and putting them on the back burner and finding out about them. So what does reciprocal mean? Reciprocal. Yeah, it's going back and forth. Let's just continue. It's like, there's a reciprocal saw. Have you ever seen those? Like a sawzall? It goes back and forth. You pull the trigger and it just goes back and forth all the time. So reciprocal means it's back and forth. Right now, we are not being reciprocal in here. Why is that? Because you're tired, you don't want to talk to me, you don't care, you stare at the floor when you don't want to do anything. So reciprocal means back and forth. So if somebody comes to my classroom, I look at them as a person and I learn about them and it's back and forth. I put those biases and stereotypes beside them, okay? I want to read you a little story real quick. I'm not going to beat cultural reciprocity to death. I mean, honestly, it's pretty simple. Learn about the person before you make any judgments about them. Put yourselves in their shoes, right? All right, I'm going to take my glasses off to read. This is Maya, okay? Story about Maya. She came to the United States from first time as a graduate student, having taught in special schools in India. So she's from India. One of her first tasks was to work at a group home teaching community living skills to adults. So, example, Alex, she's teaching him community living skills. She set off confidently. She was a trained person in working with special needs kids, all right, people. She thought she knew what to expect. To her, a restaurant is a place where you go to eat. So she realized that she's going to have to go out to eat with one of these people, one of these individuals with a disability. I think they have a cognitive disability. Maybe, I think his name was Gary, and I think he had mental retardation, okay? So they set off. She says, Gary and I entered a McDonald's. It was the first time in my life I had entered a fast food restaurant. She thought she was going to go and sit down and eat, right? Order from a waiter, sit down, you pay a tip, and leave. Well, this McDonald's, we all know in America, we like standing there in line and ordering. She said, very different from what she experienced before. She didn't know what to do. So she said she was hesitating and not knowing what to do. Guess what happened? Gary grabs her hand, walks her up to the counter, and does everything for her. And he says, would you want this, this, or this? All right? It just tells her what to do. She says, I looked at the first block, I didn't know what to do, so he told me you might want to try this. So this is a hamburger or whatever, okay? She said, you learned later that second block were specialty items. You know, you have dollar menu, all those different things, okay? She didn't know this stuff. She said she was very relieved when Gary stepped up and took her hand and helped her order off the menu. She says, in that environment, I was undoubtedly the more disabled of the two, not only in my own perception but also in others. Over the years, I related this story to my students on numerous occasions for springboard discussion on the social construct of disability. In each culture, we define who is normal. Who's normal in that situation if we say normal, right? It was Gary. She didn't know what she was doing. Gary helped her out with disability. So with cultural reciprocity, we put ourselves in situations that we don't understand, and we have to learn more about that. So if you're from Asia, I learn about your culture. What do your parents think about you? What do you do for fun? And then what do your parents say because you have a disability? What do your parents say because you have obsessive compulsive disorder? Which is awesome, by the way. All that kind of stuff. Okay, we'll talk about that later. What do you do in your classroom in that sense that if they're bringing themselves to your class, how then you put your biases aside and then be reciprocal back and forth? So that way you can meet the needs of that student, and not only the student, but the parents that they're dealing with. Okay? All right. Let's see here. So let's review for culture. Culture is the customary beliefs, the social forms, and let me see if I can make this bigger. It's a religion, racial groups, social groups. Microculture is a culture within a culture, right? We have microcultures in Christianity. Yeah, sometimes you call them nut jobs and all this, yeah. You have the idea of Christians, we have a Christian broad view, that's a culture. Then you can subcategorize, we got Nazarene, we got Baptist, we got Catholic, we got all these different, right? And then you subcategorize Nazarene to these and these and these, right? So within that context, it's so much stuff to think about within culture that you have to say, all right, I know I am whatever race, I know I have this bias, I know I have this, but I got to set this aside to see what they are bringing to the classroom, bringing to the table, right? Language is a big thing, and actually geographic origin. If you say, okay, I'm from the South, you come up with another idea of stereotypes. You might like, we talked about Duck Dynasty here the other day. Totally different stereotype than what we have here in Midwest Kansas, right? So these different languages, geographic regions, all have their different stereotypes and how we approach it. Here's some history about social context and special education. Before IDEA, theories about genetic and cultural deficits. World War II was huge on genetic deficits. What was it about? In Germany. Jews, all right? Jews are all bad. They cause every problem in the world. Does it still happen today? Yeah, absolutely. Well, in the United States, we'll just pick and choose, though. It's not only Jews. It's like Hispanics, it's African Americans, it's whites, and whatever. Okay, we choose whoever we want to hate, right? But back then, before IDEA in the 1800s, you could not have a Asian person going to school with a white person in the 1800s in the United States. However, some frontier schools, like there's a one-room schoolhouse out in Edgerton, there were African Americans attending school with white kids out in 1860-something, out near Edgerton and Gardner. In the 1990s, the bell curve. You guys remember what the bell curve is from stats? We'll talk more about this later on, but the bell curve says this. So, like, if you have an IQ of 100, that's like right in the middle. So if you have an IQ of 100, you're just a typical person, right in the middle, okay? They're saying, culture and special education, that people of minority race would fall this way, below 100. Whites would go this way. Is that true? No. Let's say we do an IQ test for people in prisons. Majority of people in prison are African American, Hispanic. So we do a IQ test. Where do you think their IQs are going to fall? Probably down here. Isn't that proving then the bell curve? No, absolutely not. Just because they're in prison and they're a minority doesn't mean that their IQ is going to be low. It's just there's certain circumstances. They may be low because they've never had the experiences of white people, right? They've never been to school. Like sometimes if you show a picture of a sailboat to an African American kid in the inner city, they're going to go, what's that? When you show basketball, they'll know. So it all depends on the experiences they have, all right? So the bell curve is, we still kind of use it today. Professors do it too. I'm telling you right now. You'll have professors that say, okay, a certain percentage of you are going to be A-B range right here. I take that back, I'm sorry. A range over here, B, C, and D. They're saying about 68% of you in classes will get about a B or C. And then a certain percentage, about 5%, are going to get A's. Some of them build that in automatically. Have you ever professors think that way? You think, I should have gotten an A. Well, they didn't give you an A, you get a B. Because they feel that you shouldn't have gotten an A because it didn't fall on the bell curve. Well, this is an old way of doing a lot of stuff. But basically, they said with bell curve, this is the way how we classify people in special education. Theories about cultural differences before IDEA, eugenics. Well, how did Gen X play a role in special education and so on? Okay? All right. talking about segregation and tracking practices. We do tracking practices today. You'll have kids that are entering, mainly they track them for gifted and talented. They track them through school and see how well they're doing. Now, special education, they track them to see how, if they're making progress towards general education. Right? But of course, school segregation was pre-IDEA, pre-Brown versus Board of Education. They could keep people from different cultures from coming to white schools, for example. Of course, we talked about that already. Here's some information about disproportionate representation. The risk ratios are saying that there is a higher number of people that are minority in special education. We talked about that a second ago, a number of different reasons, all right? And the percentage of people in special education are mainly minority, Hispanic, African American. Mainly African American. And we have to keep in our minds, in the back of our minds, that cannot turn our bias around. We can't say just because we have a classroom full of 30 kids and 15 of them are African American, a majority of those are going to be special ed. You can't say that. Because then that is not being culturally responsive or reciprocal, and it's you putting your bias into effect. Okay? And then gifted education placement. What gender is usually in gifted? Girls, right? Not very high percentage of girls are, not very high percentage of people are in gifted education, but majority of girls are in gifted education. And we know why. Guys, we know why girls are in gifted education, because they're smarter. I'm telling you. Lyle, you'll learn that someday. I'm telling you right now. Ask your mom, she'll tell you. His mom thinks he's awesome. So, within special education, cultural reciprocity, culture is a big issue. All right. Next time when we come to class, we are going to role play. This is going to be beautiful. Okay. You're going to love it. I'm going to love it. You're still going to be behind and everybody. I wanted to get this done. I want you to be thinking about this. I'm going to read this to you and then we'll be done. Okay. In your groups, you're going to have groups of 2. We may do 3. You're going to be a parent, or you're going to be a teacher, or you're going to be a student. So let's say 3, okay? Let's do this. Group of 3. One of you is a parent, one of you is a teacher, one of you is a student, okay? You're going to say, as a teacher, you're going to be playing yourself, right? So you'll be Ms. Swearingen, okay? Here's the scenario. The parent and the teacher are meeting for the parent-teacher conference. Whoever the student's name is doing poorly in class and has a history of poor behavior as well as showing signs of a learning disability. Everybody involved, you're going to be playing a stereotype and determine the best course of action to help meet the student succeed in class. Okay? Start by saying, as a teacher, Ms. Swearingen, thanks for coming today, Mr. and Mrs. Hernandez, or whatever, or Mr. Hernandez. Today we need to talk about Jose and his performance in class. The parent's going to take on the cultural role of that culture. You cannot play white if you're white. That makes sense? You can't play Hispanic if you're Hispanic. Okay, we're just white and Hispanic. All right, here we go. You can't mix. So you can play African American, you can play white, you can play. Do not stereotype. So if you're playing African American, don't stereotype and talk like an African American. Okay? Which would be hysterical to watch you do. But you're not going to do it. You're going to choose an Asian family, a Muslim family, Hispanic, African American, or white, however you want to do it. There's some things you're going to ask yourself when you get going, and you'll have this paper next time. What stereotypes exist for the role you're going to be playing? What discrimination has existed in the past for that role? How does your role view persons with disabilities? How can you make communication better between all parties? And how does your role view opposite sex and value of education? So as you're thinking about the role that you're playing, and it won't take more than 10 or 15, 20 minutes. You're going to kind of put it together, 10 or 15 minutes. We're going to role play for 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll wrap up. Okay? Questions about that? So I've done this a lot, but I haven't really done it to the extent. I want it to be a little more meaningful to you guys. I used to have people come up front and do it. It was awesome. But now I'm just going to have you do it in groups, and I'm going to come around and watch you do it in groups. So. Anna, you're the first one standing up here.
No.
All right. If you guys have any questions, let me know. I'll see you guys on Friday.